ご列席の皆様、ゴッドラブズコミックスへようこそ。これはオリジナルアーティファクトエピソード5で、フランク・ミラー、ギル・ケイン、マイケル・カルタが登場します。司会を務めるのは、国際的に有名な評論家のサタンニコです。
Thank you, Mariko. Hey, Satanico here, once again for God Loves Comics, and this is Original Artefacts, Episode 5. Let's start off with a bang. Original art from the 1983 DC miniseries Ronin, number 1, page 6. You can see a lot of the telltale signs of where Frank Miller's art will go over the balance of the century just from this seminal series. His beefier, more dramatic figure drawing here will reappear in Dark Knight Returns, while his scratchy line work recurs throughout his 300 miniseries. Of course, he would continue to evolve his approach into Sin City, which is where personally I lost interest in his work. When Sin City is at its most expressive, it seems to be Miller taking a heavier line approach from the Argentine artist Jose Munoz. However, when it evolved into mostly blocky silhouettes to match the brutish simplicity of Miller's noir obsessions, it begins to look too much like templates and cutouts, and the expressionism gives way to symbology, as if Mickey Spillane were propaganda minister for some Rust Belt republic. Sin City often looks like Miller's ham-fisted take on Carol Reed's The Third Man and Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. However, with Ronin we see a post-Daredevil Miller given free rein to explore his latest obsessions with manga and Euro comics, and the melange is nothing if not fascinating. Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, Katsutomo's Akira, Goseki Kojima's Lone Wolf and Cub, with heaping helpings of Mobius made for remarkably eccentric artwork at the time of its release. Miller has always loved long panels, be they vertical or horizontal, and allows him to convey a flow of action in a single panel without the conscious breaks of panel borders. Hence, we get a page of 5 horizontal panels. This also follows the approach of Japanese ukiyo-e masters like Yoshitoshi, an influence on James Jean, to the ubiquitous Hokusai. The great Japanese woodprint masters of the Edo era often presented triptychs, which were effectively sequential storytelling on a series of woodprints stretched horizontally across a scroll. Miller's opening panel has a daredevil-like figure in the immediate foreground and not much else. There's a splash of impressionistic vegetation and then a background of what quite literally looks like a sketchbook of an artist practicing various cross-hatching patterns, line weights, and techniques. Panel 2 is more interesting, if no less sketchy. The window frames may as well act as panel borders, but the experienced comic reader recognizes that the intent is to read this as a single panel. Indeed, there's no real sequence here, just Miller's nascent interest in drawing strippers, which he will explore in far greater detail in Sin City. After all, what is noir without its hookers with hearts of gold? Miller effectively conveys the small crowd of samurai, as well as his dancing girl, with the most minimalistic figure drawing, and adds the design element of lettering the applause as an effect to move the eye across the panel and lend a sense of life and sound. By panel 3, the sketchy figures are brought forward and lent slightly more detail. The female figure evidences a design Miller has shown a great affinity for, a woman with porcupine hair and bands that obscure her eyes but very full lips. The background of endless scribbles is no different than the previous panel and is actually the dominant and somewhat annoying visual theme of the page. Surely color subdues it, but in black and white, what would be charming in moderation just looks lazy and pointless in excess. And on this page, it is Miller's only excess. The scribbles hold no information other than just to fill in the white backgrounds in the fastest manner possible. The right side of the page gets a bit strange as Miller opts for a chicken wire crosshatch, the only one he didn't use in panel 1. He does so to indicate a shadow on his dancer's left arm, and then fills remaining white space with more lines to indicate hair, except it no longer looks attached to the dancer's head. Plus he throws in some more scribbles around her fingers as if she might be casting a smoke spell, but it's just filler. Panel 4, surely realizing eye fatigue with his scribbles and lack of spotting blacks, Miller just does the same scribble technique but comes back to give it the twice and thrice over, so it's a heavy dark background, albeit one with space and texture. His central samurai figure takes heavy notes from Gojima's Lone Wolf, with a lot of scratchy lines to indicate bone structure and shadows, but thankfully none of the quote tension lines that his successors at Image would become paradoxically obsessed with just a decade later. The final panel offers the dancing girl, Akaru from Edo, who, as expected, seems to have had all the additional hair in panel 3 cropped right off, and another litter of pointless scribbles as background. This time they offer a sliver of information, however, as Miller uses them to discern the windows, but then like weeds they crawl across every remaining empty space on the page. The woman is oddly situated, as if she is almost floating at eye level with the men. This is not what the floating world intended. But upon closer inspection, it appears that she is kneeling before them and must be on a stage. But honestly, who can really tell with these backgrounds? Taken as a whole, the page has a dense, cluttered appeal, which is odd for art so minimalistic. However, all that clutter and texture ultimately appears specious, and would likely make everyone from a true minimalist like Alex Toth to obsessive crosshatchers like Terry Austin nauseous just looking at the page. But I do like Miller's Ronin art and color, and I think in the future I'll have to take a look at whether his Mobius and Otomo-inspired pages are a little bit more successful than his Gojima stuff. Next up, we have two legends, Gil Kane and Wally Wood's Captain Action number 5 from 1969. Unlike his equally great peer and former Fleagle, Al Williamson, who did extraordinary inking work on the likes of John Buscema and specifically John Romita Jr., Wally Wood's post-EC ink jobs often look phoned in and evidenced very little of Wood's style or mastery. Some may say that's a good thing, as an inker should never impose their style over that of the penciler and primary artist. However, anytime you see the name Wally Wood, whether it's on Marvel's Silver Age Daredevil, DC's All-Star Squadron, or total clunkers like Richard Dragon, Kung Fu Fighter, inking Rick Estrada, your heart takes a little leap. Wally Wood, the legend. And then the reality sets in over one pedestrian page after another, and you wonder if you're just looking at the latest Kurt Swan art. Oddly enough, however, Wood's inks look particularly sharp, if not terribly distinctive, here on the short-lived toy franchise Captain Action. Of course, the presence of Gil Kane's dynamic pencils surely plays a Herculean role in the success of this collaboration. What is somewhat odd is that Kane was allowed to write the book as well, and at a glance, the tone and theme of the book is reminiscent of one of Kane's most acclaimed works, His Name is Savage, although that was written by Archie Goodwin. Savage came out in 1968, and this Captain Action series is from 1969. Is it the caprice of the gods, or the work of Satan? Hardly sounds like a ready-made catchphrase of a line of children's action figures. So what stands out here visually, besides the very distinct patina of the yellow masking tape at the top and the publishing info pasted at the bottom, is a typically explosive Gil Kane composition that appears as if it were from the same artistic jag Kane was on with His Name is Savage. And whether real or reputational placebo, Wood's inks appear to add a polish to Kane's pencils not seen in the staccato line work of Savage, nor certainly the tepid inks of frequent Kane collaborator Sid Green from the same period. I said in original Artefacts episode 3 that Gil Kane was almost physically incapable of drawing a bland figure, as evidenced in the dynamism of his unconscious Green Lantern figure. But here the action all but demands the Kane dynamic. But where so many artists draw the classic scene of a hero or villain crashing through the skylight in almost a Jesus pose of splayed legs and arms, but instead of being in control, Kane's figure is decidedly out of control, hurtling through the glass and wood frame like a rag doll. Where so many artists focus heavily on the shattered glass as a reliable action design trope, Kane deploys it only to convey the needed information and quite typically focuses on his figure. The man's hair is a clear tip-off to his downward trajectory, but the more subtle hem of his suit coat blowing upward adds a finishing touch to the physics of the fall. And just as I noted in the prior piece of Kane original art, once again his hands are masterfully drawn and as expressive as any element on the page. Kane once again uses the same technique on the right hand that he used in the Green Lantern page discussed in the prior episode, in which it appears as if he were looking at his own thumb as a means of gauging perspective and then drawing his hand as a model. However, that disembodied pair of hands in the bottom right corner also perfectly coalesces with Kane's caption, indicating an act of mass death and chaos. Hence, it's the excellent storytelling one can always expect from master craftsmen such as Kane and Wood. Finally, there's a single loafer also on a downward path, and clearly not from the foot of the central figure in the panel. Had this been Savage, or a book from Wood's old publisher EC, Kane may have drawn a dismembered foot still in the shoe. However, he keeps it classy and code approved with just the shoe. Lace is still tied, and indeed there's a long history of people quite literally blown out of their footwear, alternately by explosions or when being struck by cars and such. Sadly, it seems that just as Kane was hitting his stride and seemed to be highly motivated by his dual writing penciling duties, this was actually the final issue of Captain Action. Despite the first two issues being written by still teenage Jim Shooter and issue 1 drawn entirely by Wally Wood himself, followed by some of Gil Kane's best work from the time period, Captain Action was doomed to the dumpster, but not for lack of craft or the effort of a pair of artistic titans. And lastly, another artistic master. This is a Michael Kaluta splash page from Forbidden Tales of Dark Mansion number 8 from 1972. Michael Kaluta is an artist I could do many segments on because he is so versatile, yet somehow maintains a style so distinctively his own. Kaluta is one of those rare artists who has made a big name for himself without being associated with a lengthy or impactful run on a specific mainstream title. As a result, Kaluta's closest peers would be former studio mates Bernie Wrightson and Jeffrey Jones. Kaluta has Wrightson's delicate line and observational talent, but Jeff Jones' fine art sensibility and sensuality. Still, Kaluta is very much his own man, and while this isn't his most memorable of pages in terms of beautiful figure drawing, it is carried by his exquisite line work and composition. In fact, this page has a very strong EC Comics flavor approaching the swampy, sticky line of Ghastly Ingalls. However, Kaluta is such an aesthete that he can never get quite as grimy as Ingalls or Jack Davis. Thus, his central female figure still has the delicate posture of a Frazetta girl, albeit quite a bit more spindly than Frazetta would ever allow for his lush women. And Kaluta's dilapidated wooden bridge still looks stately and beautiful compared to the sort of knotty, barnacle-encrusted bridge dripping in slime an Ingalls or Davis would have served up. Kaluta frames his tiny central figure between two imposing silhouettes. On one side, the cliff on which the Dark Mansion sits. On the other side, the opposing cliff with the requisite gnarled tree. Kaluta's figure is so small in the composition that he draws her with the sparsest of lines to the point that her extended arm, from which she releases a raven, looks skeletal. Her hair is just a tangle of frazzled lines that Kaluta thickens by going over them multiple times to delineate her dress and figure in what appears to be an impatient and rapid sketch. Kaluta's fine line work on everything from the woman to the wood bridge is of course muddied by the color in the final printing on newsprint. However, even in print, it remains effective. Most interesting among the bridge pylons and knotty roots below lurks a feral Wrightson-esque figure with a hunched posture, but the ham-chopped facial hair that suggests a down-on-his-luck Kane, the sadomasochistic host of the House of Mystery. The sack slung over his back may as well be his belongings, a sack full of stories from the House of Mystery from which he will be evicted a decade later. However, since this is just a splash page intro and has no corresponding story inside it, there is no mention of the character. Indeed, Kaluta only drew the cover in this splash page. The other notable interior artists were Ernie Chan and the fantastically expressive Alex Nino. Nevertheless, Kaluta did in fact also draw the cover for the final issue of House of Mystery 321 a decade later, in which a dejected Kane finally moves out of the house. The story plot is truly fascinating. From Wiki. In the final issue of the House of Mystery, Karen Berger, whom Kane first met in issue 292, the first issue she edited for DC, arrives as an unexpected guest at Kane's birthday party, takes him through a secret door that leads him to the DC offices, and tells him that his series has been canceled and that it is too old-fashioned. The house is torn down, and Kane metafictionally analyzes his own existence as a character in a comic book. So Karen Berger effectively evicted Kane, although he and his long-suffering brother Abel would make triumphant returns in Alan Moore's Swamp Thing and Neil Gaiman's Sandman, both edited by Berger, and neither of which were ever deemed too old-fashioned. And that's it for this episode of Original Artifacts. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you're enjoying the series as much as I am enjoying making it. There are so many incredible artists out there in the medium of comics, and so I look forward to exploring all of them. Thanks very much. See you next time. Bye.